So the definition of the average rate of change is slope. Our slope formula is y minus y over x minus x. Now normally we have done slope through linear equations, y equals mx plus b. So if we look at this problem, we see that it is a linear equation. It's 3x plus 14. So it's asking for the slope from the interval over -9 to 0. So if we graph that, we have 3x plus 14 okay, so we have this line, and it wants us to look at the interval from -9 to 0. Now these are x values, so they want to know what the interval for when x equals -9 to when x equals 0. So -9 is approximately here, and x is 0 over here. So we're looking at the graph from here to there. Now on a linear equation, it doesn't matter where you are on the graph, the slope is the same. The slope doesn't change anywhere on any interval. So to answer the question for a linear one, it will just be 3, because that's the slope of the whole graph. It doesn't matter what interval you take out. So our slope is 3. And again, this is a linear equation, 6x minus 1. So it's linear, so it doesn't matter what interval we're going on. Our slope is still going to be what our slope is of the equation, which is 6. Now, when we get an equation like this, that is a square root equation. So if we graph that, so we put in 10 square root of x, our equation looks like this. So it's not linear. So it's not going to have the same slope. And slope is really how much it's sloping from one point to the other. And it's a straight line. But we can find slope between any 2 points. So it wants us to, between 10 and 20, find the slope of that. So let me just show you what that means. If we graph those points, I'm going to pick a point on that line, point here. I'm going to change those points to we want when x is 10, and it's going to move it, and when x is 20. So there's our point when x is 10. Let me see if I can change the window. So there's our other point. So they want to know the slope of the line through these 2 points. Well, it's not a perfect straight line. So what it's wanting you to do is let's look, and let's put a line between those 2 points. So if we go between this point and this point, do you see that line does not follow that curve? But what we are trying to find is the slope of that line between those 2 points. And we just use the slope formula for that, which is y minus y over x minus x. So if we take those 2 points, now these are going to be decimals. So let's do 44.7. Let's set up the slope formula. 44.7 minus 31.6 So that's my y minus y. And then I started with the 44, so I'm going to have to start with the 20 on bottom. So then 20 minus 10. And enter. So we get 1.31. So that should be the slope of this line. And you can use your calculator to check it if you go to geometry, measurement, slope. It'll give you the slope of that line right there, and it's 1.31. So that's what it's doing, is just taking those 2 points and figuring the slope between those two. Now, to do it algebraically, you would have to work that out. So let's go and see what that looks like if we go to the calculator button. So our equation is 10 square root of x. So to find that value, I need to put the x values in. So my first x value was 10. That's what I'm doing here. I'm finding this point. I'm putting that 10 in for that x. And enter. And it gives me that 31.6. And then you put the other point in. 20 is our other x value. And that gives me my other y value of the point. So there are 2 y values, 44.7 and 31.6. So you have to find your y values first. Now you can also define your equation if you'd rather do it that way. You can go to Menu, Actions, Define, and say f of x equals 10 square root of x, and enter. And then we want to know what f of 10 is. And there's my 31.6. So it doesn't matter how you do it, but the first thing you have to do is substitute your x values in and find the y's, okay? And then they want you to round it to the 10th place. So our 3 is in the 10th place, and the 1 is not 5 or greater, so I will keep it 1.3. So it should be 1.3. So just be sure you round correctly. Now here we have a quadratic, so let's look at this one. Negative x squared plus 9. So let's put this one in. So we have negative x squared plus 9. Okay. So there is our quadratic, and it wants the slope on the interval -9 to -1. Okay. So let's just go ahead and work it out first. You can also look at your table to get your points. So if we look at our table and find where x is -9, so our point would be -9, -72, and then at -1 it would be 8. So those were the 2 points that we're looking at. So you can get your points that way also. So -9, -72. So I'd start my, let's open another page. Start my slope formula. So negative, I forgot what it was, -72. Minus, now we have to find our y value of our -1. That is the interval we're going over, right? -9, -1. So my y value of my -1 is 8. And then my x values were -9 minus -1. Be sure you put those double negatives in there if you need to. Let me just check my numbers again. -1, +8, and -9, -72. So the slope for that should be 10. Now let's look at it on the graph and see what it looks like. Okay, so let me put the points on there. And it's hard to get the exact point, so if you'll just pick a point on the graph, and then you can change the values to what you want. So just double click on the X and put in what you wanted. I need -1. And this one's gonna be way down there. -9, right? So I'm going to have to zoom out. There it is. Okay. So those are our 2 points that we're finding the slope between. So if I put my line between those, go to geometry, points and lines, go from that point to that point, you see that it doesn't follow that curve. It's just the straight line between that point and that point. So if I check the slope, and click that line, there it is, it's 10, okay? So basically you were just finding those 2 points and doing the slope formula on them. So if we go put 10 in there for our answer, that should be correct, okay? Same thing here. You're going to put 9 in for that x, work it out, find the y, and put 16 in for that x and work it out and find the y. Now this one's a decimal, so just use your decimal and then round your answer to the 10th place. If you want to put it on the graph and go to the table, you can find your ordered pairs that way.